just my nephew Steve, who's running a proper film camera as well. Welcome to Steve, and thanks for doing that. I'll hand it over to you.
Yes. Well, hello everybody. Welcome. I'm Pamela, and this is the Poatina Tree Gallery, and we have Russell exhibiting today, and his title of his exhibition is Cardinal Light, and we're very proud of Russell. We think it's his fourth, isn't it? It's his fourth solo exhibition. He's been in numerous group exhibitions here at the Poatina Tree Gallery. And thank you everyone for coming, and thank you for the people who are online as well. Russell will do an acknowledgement of country, and just to remind everybody that everything's for sale, and
except also, the one that's sold.
Yes, except the one that's sold. And everyone's welcome to stay and enjoy the nibbles that Joe has provided, and also the wonderful things in the Tears Tea Lounge. So, thank you.
I'll just put my water bottle down. First of all, I would want to do what's called the Welcome to Country. Now, though my American friends who may be listening online, we are acknowledging the traditional owners of this place and respecting their elders. Here in Poatina we take that very seriously, and we have very beautiful connections with First Nations elders of this region and this state of ours. So I'd like to pay my really deep felt respects to the people who this gallery stands on. It's actually a shared ground between the Terranotapania and the Lemurenia people. That's the Big River Nation and the Mid-Northlands Nations who were in this, and this piece of ground, this sort of flat ground that we're on, was actually as we think it was a wallaby hunting ground that would help them as they went up the mountain to their summer sites, or they came down to the ocean sites. So it was a northern route for these people. And also I want to recognise, and we don't normally do that here because it's not part of this land, but the Paninia people of the rainforests that I've been painting of at Liffey. And I'm privileged to be able to sit in these landscapes and learn from the traditions of the people who were there, and that will become very clear with the Cider Gums, and to experience the forests as they still exist, but are at significant threat. So I want to acknowledge those elders, and perhaps I want to particularly acknowledge Auntie Patsy, who has given me permission to talk about the Cider Gums in a deeper way than just the surface level, and I've spent time up there with her, and there's been a beautiful mutual relationship and respect that's come out of that process. So I want to acknowledge Auntie Patsy, Dr. Auntie Patsy, and the elders that are around that are supporting me. So to get on with the exhibition part, well, it's not to get on with it, because it's actually really an integral part of what that is. The show is called Cardinal Light. Someone says, but I thought cardinals were bishops. Thanks, Anna. Cardinal is cardinal points of the compass, north, south, east and west. So the work behind me is what the exhibition is named from. This is called Cardinal Light, this photographic series. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this work and highlight why I'm talking in terms of cardinal light and the importance of light to both my photography and my painting. There's a certain point where light, if we didn't have it, we wouldn't see it, but light needs darkness. You cannot have a painting or a photography without darkness. And light is separated from darkness. The darkness can't overcome the light. The light wins when you turn it on. It also goes off if you lose your power. But so light is really significant. But in Tasmania, we are about the 42nd parallel south. and we get a very low northern light in winter and a very long twilight in summer. And it affects our space and our living and our trees. Now this work, if you want to think in terms of north, south, east and west. So this one tree, not group of trees, one tree photographed from each of the cardinal points. So I'm going to talk about those lights and how they're significant and why they become significant for the Lemurenia who live there and celebrate it. So the first one, the Northern Light. In Tasmania, the Northern Light, like you guys in America, it's the Southern Light. You have to think, switch yourselves around and think, oh, that's my Southern Light. Well, here it's the Northern Light. Is the light we get to grow our veggies in our gardens. We want a north-facing house to get better energy efficiency. The Northern Light on these trees brings warmth to these cider gums. Now, I need to stop there and say, well, what's a cider gum? A cider gum is a gum that's a little bit like a maple tree. It's got a sap which is sweet, that can be tapped and was tapped for thousands of years by the Lemurenia. And what they did was that they would tap on the northern face because that was where it was warm, and therefore that would flow and come down the tree. So on that northern is where you would find a tap. Now this isn't a tap tree because there's no tapping. Now I might get Suzanne just to move her camera just a fraction this way for a second so perhaps you can see here. So here, this is a tap tree. And that's the northern face. And this gnarly circling on this tree is caused by hundreds and hundreds of years of tapping it and getting this nectar to come down. So this tree is a tap tree. Now, because it's a tap tree, it's a living, it's a now dead. It was living when I started painting this painting. This tree was alive when I started. It's now dead. The leaves are all gone. This is a testament. It's like an archaeology. It's like a cathedral or a castle on a hill for these people. People for centuries came and visited and tapped this, and they would put a bowl underneath where they were tapping, and the fluid would fall into that bowl and just come down the trunk and go in. In spring it would be a bit more like a tap than it would be a drip, and it would collect in there. They would then cover it with bark and rocks, and then they would let it brew and make a slightly alcoholic drink. And it's called a weak alcoholic drink. I guess you could take it and then put it through a distilling process and make it more like a whiskey. But they would then celebrate and have a celebration. But it wasn't just for them. It was for all the nations of this land called Tasmania. And they were about 17 language groups in Tasmania, and they would meet at the Cider Gums for a festival. And at that festival, they would celebrate life, they would trade. People from over there would bring ochres, and people there would bring shells, and they would trade whatever they'd found together, and they'd also do things like organise intermarried wives and things like that. So that would happen every year in the spring. If you know Australian Aboriginal culture, you understand that there's a Bunya festival in Queensland where the bunya nut does the same thing for them. They gather for the bunya nut festival. Tribes from Australia all over the nation go to that festival. Bogle Moss in Canberra area. Yeah. So it's a shared celebration time. So these trees are very important. It's so important that this tree is automatically on the Heritage Register because it's a tap tree. Even though no one knew about it until I found it. And we were able to record that. So really important to understand that this culture comes, and that comes with the northern light. So a tree which is tapped is always trapped on the north. So I might just go a leaf south for later because that's probably the hardest one. But if I go to this tree here, and this is, that's the west. I did put it in the right order of the compass for us. In fact, most Indigenous languages in Australia have very specific north, south, east, west encoded in their language. So they can tell you I'm going somewhere, they'll tell you which direction as well. That's very common. I'm not sure whether that was part of the Tasmanian language, but on the mainland it's everywhere. So here, this west, that's that afternoon light, that lingering light, the sun setting and a hope of a new day coming. It's the warmer part, it's the afternoon, it's a longer light. So there's not, that I'm aware of, there's not any cultural significance of the Western light, except that it's probably where you're sitting in the afternoon. You're sitting under this tree, imbibing of the cider and celebrating in that space. The eastern light in Tasmania is our morning light. And it's our light where there's hope for the day. It's where it's normally a colder spot. As the light comes up over the thing and it starts to warm up in the day, it's where you will find the birds in the morning giving themselves the sun to keep themselves light. And the morning light is in a sense a light of renewal and change and hope. So that there, but the real story of these cider gums sits in the southern light. And in this tree here, in this picture, you actually see there's another, those in the gallery can come and look up it closer. If you're online, you can see the detail and read the stories of these on my website. So I've actually got a page dedicated to each of the paintings in the show, and you can go online and look at it and read in detail the stories, and the stories are recorded there. But here there's a tree, in the bottom of that tree you'll see, like here, there's a dark hole. And on that dark hole there's also a ring which is from a slab, where the slab has been removed. Now, Auntie Patsy tells me two things here. The slabs, there will be other trees in the area with the slab. This tree and this tree both got the slab missing, plus another 9 or 10, because they take a big slab of the bark off to build a hut. And that hut was a semi-permanent dwelling that would be there to return to each summer, or spring, coming up to the mountains, and would provide them with shelter and would be renewed. But they didn't have to do it every year, or every tree would have that mark on it. It was a pretty permanent and large. Now if you think in terms of that, that's higher than the roof here. That's a big substantial. So that hut that was being built was substantial. Not only that, but this tree was substantial when that was cut. And after it was cut, it was then burnt. And it's always burnt on the south side. Now, the sadness and the tragedy of the Lermarenia and these people and these cider gums is that these were being prepared as funerary trees. In other words, when a person died up there, you couldn't dig the soil, it's rock. You were interred in a tree. And it wasn't just any tree. It was a tree you prepared. You were allocated a tree as a young person, and that's your tree, and you nurture it, you look after it. You prepare the hole by burning in here, just very slowly over time, to build a big enough hollow that when you die, you can be buried in it. So because of the burn marks, we know that this tree was this sort of size at least by 1830. And I say 1830 because by that stage, colonisation had removed, and there's very few or no direct descendants from Lermarenia. It's one of the few groups that don't have living descendants here in Tasmania, but there are some indirect ones, possibly from that trading going on over the years. But so we know that these trees that have been burnt like this are pre-1830. So before 1830, somebody was preparing this for their burial. And the sad part is that because of the way the colonisation of Tasmania occurred, the chances were they were never buried there. So there is sadness in that. But there's also relationship, because in these trees is an intimate relationship. One tree with that person, that's your ancestor. So when I brought Auntie Patsy up there, she goes, wow, the ancestors, the living people of my people. These are them. And if you think about that in terms of the mortuary and the fertilisation process of body decay, then yes, these trees are fed by the bodies of the people. So for Auntie Patsy and for the people, and each of the clans in Tasmania had a tree which was their tree. And although it's not specific for the Lermarenia, because there's no one around to say, yes, that was our tree, it's assumed that the cider gum was the Lermarenia's tree. Auntie Patsy, who comes from the northeast, her tree is the peppermint gum. But in this area, this is how they were prepared. So here is a living testament. This is probably the most spectacular tree I've found there. And since I've been there, I'm starting to understand the signs of dying. And although this has got the most leaves and the most canopy, it's very clear to me now that the leaves and the canopy are dying and this tree is in real trouble. The ones that are burnt are actually surviving better than the ones that aren't burnt. The later trees, the big trees that have probably not been allocated and not been burnt, are actually dying quicker than the older ones because climate change is having an impact. I'm not going to go into that now. You can chat to me later about what that might mean for climate change. But the reality is that these trees are dying. They've been dying in front of my eyes. The work on the right here, I painted in 2015. No, don't bother turning around. In my artist in residency, and it had leaves on it, and it's now died. And the tree here has died in my presence. This one is struggling with life. It's got virtually not much chance. It's dying. The one behind here has fallen over from wet rot in my presence while I was between two painting trips 2 weeks apart. One of the trees fell over halfway up because it had wet rotted. So I'm watching these die. My original Cider Gum project was to do a lot of paintings of these so I could get the whole landscape. And it's become very clear to me that if it's going to take me too long to paint it, it's too hard to get there to paint well, I have to do something else. So I'm actually switching my focus up there to my photographic work. My aim of my new photographic project is to photograph each tree differently so that I can express the character of that tree and the history of that tree. So some trees, that will be in different ways. Now, rooted here and this tree are the same tree. I've got 2 series of this tree. So my aim is to try and find every significant tree up there, and I estimate there's at least 50, and to document them before they die. And as they're dying, literally in the last 2 years, I've watched 3 or 4 die. The time's running out. So my aim is to get it for the record to be there. Okay, so I've spent a lot of time on the Cider Gums, so I want to briefly talk a little bit about the rainforest paintings. As with the Cider Gums, rainforest is a whole different environment, and literally these 2 sites are around about 3 miles as the crow flies from one another. They're not far apart, maybe 5 or 6. So these trees, as a rainforest, a cool rainforest, are also at risk over time. As our temperature or climate warms up, I think we will still have for quite a while myrtle rainforests. But I can envisage my great-grandchildren maybe coming to visit Tasmania where there's not many left. So there's a certain sense where I'm wanting to preserve the rainforest. Now with my painting, I sit and paint on location. So all of these paintings here are about 30 to 40 hours work or 50 hours work in them, depending how big the canvas is. And I go into the forest and I sit and I paint. I was just talking to someone here earlier today. I don't sit there and do this. It would drive me nuts. I sit there and do this. My aim is, in 2, 3, 4 hours, is to cover the whole canvas in paint. And I do that in 10 layers worth. So as I'm painting, I go, light shows up here, I go, oh good. Light disappears, so I come back down here and work in the dark. And when the light comes where I want it, I go back and paint this bit. And when it gets dark, I go over and paint this bit. And I have 2 rules for painting. 1, be energetic every layer. 2, if I'm getting bored, I should stop and go home. So that actually helps. So when you have a look at the paintings, you come up, they're incredibly painterly. But it's because I actually have that energy. But there's something really important. I talk about my work as distilling light and time to get you a sense of place. What you have here on these very photographic looking paintings is not a photograph, and you can't possibly do this with the camera. because it's a period of 30, 40 hours over 10, 12 weeks, maybe over a year and a half in spring and autumn or whatever, where the light's coming from sort of the same direction, where I'm responding to and recording. So what I'm doing is actually distilling the moment. And by distilling light and the moment, it's like a good fine whiskey. One there's called XO, which is named after a whiskey. Not whiskey, brandy, sorry. Sorry. Don't like whiskey, I love brandy. But maturing and distilling is a time required process. You don't get quality, you don't get flavour, you don't get richness in an instant. You get it over time. So the oil paintings are distilled light and time that will get you to understand the place. So each of these paintings have a little bit of a story behind them that come from it. Sentinels over here has got its own. And by the way, 7 of these trees have disappeared since I, don't worry about turning it. Since I started painting it, they got blown over in the wind about 2 months ago. So they are still fragile landscapes. But this is called Fern Dance, because there's a dance. I have a series of paintings which I call pas de deux, dance of two, or pas de vie, dance of life. And these is a dance between the sassafras at the front, which is growing on the tree fern here, which is resting on the myrtle there. So the tree fern's like that on the myrtle, it's being held up, and on the front this sassafras, and it's a dance. And so in my series of paintings there's the dance series where trees dance and work together, different species working together in a life thing. But it also tells us that there's a community, and we live in a community which is really important here, that there's a community which is a dance of life. And that the life that this dance is bringing these kangaroo ferns, it's bringing all sorts of mosses and algae and fungi, and it's bringing all this other life to this community of painting. And the life, as I sit there over time and see and observe, the trees tell me their story, and they tell me what they're doing there and what's there, and the animals and the birds that visit, and the whole community that goes on. Now you didn't hear the cockatoos, the black cockatoos that visit the myrtle above us, and we're starting to crack open to get bugs out of the myrtle which is growing this tree here. So one stage I was painting and bits of wood were being dropped from those black cockatoos. But the advantage of being on site, and I do paint plein air, but not like the Impressionists, like Monet. I use plein air painting, but I'm using painting techniques of Rembrandt and Rubens. But those experiences of the artist are imbibed in the love and the care and the brushstrokes and the environment. So as I sit there for 50 hours, I am totally privileged, because I am sitting in this beautiful place. And I am seeing things that you looking at this painting will never see. But I'm hoping, and I think this is true, that the paintings give you that sense of place that's distilled and enriches our lives. And so that's what I find, and the rainforest, certainly the rainforest is the hardest environment to paint. Absolutely.
Those black cockies aim for the head on purpose,
What's that?
Those black cockatoos, they aim for you.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm sure of those things.
Yeah. Very true. So yeah, and they decimate logs. I was walking past, just when I was painting this one, there was a log across the path, and walking there, someone was visiting with somebody. She said, "What's caused all this?" And I said, "Oh, it's easy, it's the black cockatoos." Ripping the log apart. And of course that opens it up for more fungal and breakdown and keeps the forest going. So there's that. So that's my formal talk. It's a bit more longer today than I would normally do. So sort of combining the opening with the artist talk to give you an idea about what goes into these works. So any questions? I can't take them from you guys online because I can't see the feed screen, so I don't know if you're asking questions. But if you ask a question online, I'll get back to you and give you an answer. That will be no problem. So any questions from the people who are here?
Which painting 40 the hardest out of this collection?
Of which was the hardest?
Which one, do you ever feel that feeling that the painting is fighting you to be made?
Yeah. Probably for the two on the end for different reasons. The one on the end because it was an afternoon painting and I'd spent most of my time working on this painting and my energy levels were lower and I'd be sitting down at the ground and going, oh yeah, you know, and it's got a bit faster brush strokes, a little broader painting in that, possibly because it's like the afternoon and I'm tired. But I understand the question about artistic, how do you do that? At some levels, the artistic decision is made as soon as I decided where to park my easel. But probably the one next to it, the long one, just because I'm struggling with the length of this tree, which is there to there as I'm painting, and painting at the top of it, that's a physical thing, but more because between the bottom and the top are very different dynamics of light and environment.
It's very impressive work. I can see how that would be a
Yeah,
struggle.
so there was a lot more. Yeah, it was entered into a major competition but didn't get selected, so hey. But in terms of the painting, yeah, look, and it's because you could concentrate up here, down here, down here, down here, and where you spent your time and what you did with that and how much to do and how much not to do, how much fern you really need to put in, and also painting the ferns. You know, ferns are so hard to paint, and I've now I started doing my first fern paintings in 1999, and I've had a lot of experience, but I'm still going, what's the best way? There's no quick method for fern, and there's a slow method, and that tender looks really terrible. Just look at the work of Yvonne Gerard to see how too particular can make a fern look stiff and archaic.
Overloaded.
Yeah, but yeah, so yeah, that one's certainly the one I struggled with most.
So is that a cider? Oh,
Sorry, yeah.
is that a cider gum?
No, that's a myrtle.
A myrtle.
So there's no cider gums in this side of the room.
Yep. Okay.
So that's myrtle, sassafras, dogwoods, tree ferns,
Yes.
and silver wattles.
And they little fern attachments that are coming out from the branch.
So from the branch, that's the branch, the old branch that the
Yes.
fern's growing on.
Yes.
So yeah, mainly the kangaroo fern, but there's other smaller ferns in the middle. Down the bottom, there's not necessarily on that one. It's visible in this one here. But yeah, there's a. I bought myself a nice fern identification book, and just in the bottom there's 3 species of ferns, and the hardwater fern's not there at all. So there's a fish fern, fishbone fern, a soft fern, and another one. So yeah, it's the life of that supported. It's worth. And look, he's just take your phone, point it at that. It will open up to the page for that painting, and it will tell you the story. So you will read a little bit more about what I mean by XO and the story behind that. So there's pretty interactive for you online. You can go find them there either through the catalogue, click on the link in the catalogue, or go to the galleries and just click on the link and you'll go to the page and you'll be able to get that full story. Yep.
Russell, I noticed you're identifying as Tasmanian. You haven't always been in Tasmania. How have you found adjusting to painting the Tasmanian landscape compared to others that you had?
It's a good question. The other rainforests I've painted in have been in Victoria, in Marysville, which isn't geologically far from here and very geologically similar to here, and then the dry rainforests in Sydney, which are totally different rainforests. I think there's 2 things. First, light. Light is very different here, and light affects colour. So the brown in here that I'm using, I use Van Dyke brown a lot, but it's mixed with raw umber here. If I'm in Victoria, I'm painting with burnt umber, and if I'm in Sydney, I'm painting with raw sienna. And it's the light changes from the soil, and also the light, particularly in the low light. So, for instance, in this here, which is a very low northern light for this painting, it really affects. So, to this beautiful island. Tasmania is known for its light. If you go to the Glover Prize, you can tell by walking in the door which paintings the person's been in Tasmania and lived here, and which has not painted from here or taken photographs and gone home and then painted themselves. And you can see that by the light. You can tell the people who are entering from interstate because they're different light. And it's very obvious. The other thing about Tasmania, I want this to hear because it's actually a pretty interesting topic, but there's a certain sense where Tasmanians, artists, treasure the light and the darkness. In fact, that's celebrated by Dark Mofo and by Mona, who go very much into the spiritual side of darkness. And our history in Tasmania, which we shared a bit of, the Cider Gums, there's a history where there's a lot of darkness. We are people of the light. As a Christian who paints here, light has overcome darkness. And so there's a battle that goes on in me as the artist to give light in the middle of potential darkness as well, and to bring light. And so there's a really interesting, that the Cider Gum paintings I'm doing are all bright and light and colourful, not fog-bound, deep, dark light. And even in this one with the sentinels, the light protects the darkness of the forest. So that's a conscious choice of mine as well. So as an artist, I'm painting light and colour in the middle of a dark rainforest. Well, don't paint in the rainforest in winter, it's too dark, you can't see. I come out in the car park. But yeah, good question, and it's a very important one as an artist in Tasmania.
Russell, do each of these paintings happen over a period of time with a number of visits?
Yeah.
So you're really experiencing the life of that tree.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
very special, isn't it?
And so, yeah, look, they will be anywhere between, this one here I started painting, in January, and I've stopped painting in the winter months. So basically, once it gets to the winter solstice or the equinoxes in June, I then go to a different painting, and then I come back in September and start painting it again. So I've got the light from the same direction, it's just spring and autumn, and there's a bit of a difference to foliage, and I have to be aware of that. But generally speaking, yes. Some paintings here have taken me a good year to paint, with some breaks in the middle, both from injury and from light. So I've got two other winter paintings. So one winter painting I've got, this will be the third winter before I can get back to it again. So I missed the window this year. It's just got about 4 layers to go and I'll be finished. So it is a long time, but it's that period of time sitting in the forest. And I'm sitting with these trees, I know the trees, I know what comes and goes, I know the birds, I can see the seasons, I can see the new growth in the myrtles and what that does to the forest every spring. So there is a different process, where if I was either taking a photograph and going home and painting, or doing a quick painting in a couple of hours, I wouldn't see any of that.
Russell, thinking of other artists, who would you sort of say was your family tree of
Family tree of tree artists. It's a really good question. I'm going to give you the two surprising answers first. The two most influential on my painting are Jackson Pollock and Fred Williams. Now Jackson Pollock, because there's no way I can paint forest floors like that without understanding what he was doing.
Right.
John Glover tried to paint forest floors back in his studio when he went back to paint, and he lined up the rocks in nice little rows.
Ah.
And he lined up the leaves in nice little spots. And that's why it didn't work. But there was something about how Pollock would dance and splash. As I said to someone today, most of these are me cleaning my brush. Oh, go. Back over here. So that's Pollock. Fred Williams, one of my aims in life is to have my work exhibited next to Fred Williams. Fred, me, totally different painters. He paints the unspecific, wide landscape, which is very Australian. I paint the very specific location, embedded landscape. But for me, you know, he's the last great Australian landscape painter. And I know there's some beautiful other ones, John Wolseley and Tillett maybe, but you know, for me, he's wonderful. In terms of the other part of the tradition, Rembrandt, I've just discovered the amazing painting of Gainsborough. I always thought he was stiff and horrible. I had none until I saw some real Gainsboroughs live, and I understood that he is just doing what I'm doing, expressive painting. It's just because it's condensed into a little picture in our albums, you just miss what he's doing. Gainsborough Constable. This is very interesting. I saw a Constable in the latest show coming around, this particular painting, and I came back and I was just working on started on this tree, and he's done this amazing forest with a monument to a British artist and this forest, and I'm just aware of his work, and I think, wow, you know, if I can get the freedom of that, and that really influenced that painting. So yeah, but the traditionalists in that sense, Rembrandt, Rubens, Gainsborough, Constable, have all contributed massively to my painting techniques and the way I go about those techniques. And you know, understanding that these guys aren't stiff, they're actually fluid masters of the brush. Anyone else? I give long answers, so you know. It was good. They're like in a class, and the kids by this stage will be going, "Stop asking questions. We want to go back to lunch." Yeah. So we'll wrap it up there. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for all those people online. Please, if you've got any more comments online, any questions you want to ask, make sure you put them down. At least write and say, "Hi Russell, I was here," because I've got no idea until I go home and go through the posts. I won't have a clue. In fact, I'm going photographing into the wilderness in the next 4 days, so if you don't get a comment in the next 4 days, no, it's not because I won't, it's because I don't have reception and I can't give it to you. Yeah, so thanks a lot for coming, and thank you so much for the gallery that we have in the community, which is you people, for enabling us artists in the village to have a beautiful place to exhibit. Yeah, I mean the work, yeah, exactly, and nicely because